Portland, bundle up, we're going agate hunting, and Newport is home to some of the best agate hunting on the Oregon coast. They even have a super rare and sought-after variety named after them, the Newport Blue. And if you're like me and mistake every shiny rock or piece of glass for agate, don't worry, there's usually 1 to 10 unofficial experts on the aptly named Agate Beach ready to tell you what to look out for. Afterwards, you can warm up with a hot meal at local Ocean Seafoods or a South Beach Fish Market or Clearwater restaurant, all while overlooking sea lions. There is truly something for everyone in Newport. Plan your trip today at discovernewport.com/citycast. That's discovernewport.com/citycast.
Portland Public Schools was already staring down a $50 million budget deficit for the next school year. But then this week, another blow landed. The district is now projecting it's going to be $10 million short this year, too. So what are they going to do? Today on CityCast Portland, Oregonian education reporter Julia Silverman is here to check in on the district's current financial straits, what it's going to take to cover the costs, and why, despite it all, there is still reason for optimism inside Portland's largest school district. It's Thursday, March 5th. I'm executive producer John Notarianni in for Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Julia, thank you so much for being on the show. I feel like I see you once every 6 months and you fill us in with all of the mostly scary and upsetting, but like sometimes really great things going on at PPS. So thanks for making the time.
I prefer to think of it as hot goss. Thanks. And yes, once about every 6 months sounds right. Beginning of the school year, maybe mid-year checkup. Maybe I'll see you again in June. Who knows? A girl can dream.
Oh my gosh. Well, what goss do you have for us today? Maybe to the tune of $10 million? The district just suddenly found that there's a $10 million deficit in the current school year budget, right?
Crazy how that happens.
I mean,
right.
This is on top of, we already had a $50 million shortfall for the next academic year. How do we end up with an extra $10 million deficit?
Well, that's a great question. Many people are asking it, and I think there's more to dig into. But the short answer is Portland Public Schools has said there's a confluence of factors, everything from the unanticipated expenses tied to federal lawsuits. And we all do know that the Trump administration does have an affinity for targeting Portland on everything from its policy around transgender athletes to whether or not the new Center for Black Student Excellence is in violation of civil rights law. So there have been legal costs. There have been a number of unanticipated facilities issues, a burst pipe here, $800,000 for a guardrail there. These things add up. There have also been fewer vacancies than they thought there would be. So this is like mid-year resignations or retirements or changes. And I think a district of this size, and don't forget PPS employs almost 4,000 people, sort of counts on those to float the budget along a little bit, and there just have been fewer than they thought. And the other thing that they've cited is that there have been services added back without offset cuts, which is finance director speak for, hey, we paid for some stuff and didn't make cuts elsewhere. So like in your household budget, if you DoorDash 3 nights in a row, you got to eat oatmeal for the next 3 nights, but nobody's been eating much oatmeal at Portland Public Schools.
I guess it's actually, when you really think about it, not surprising, but I just am so struck by the idea that part of the way that PPS balances their budget is by counting on people to quit. And not enough people have quit in this school year.
It doesn't seem ideal. And now, technically, that household budget that I mentioned, you would have savings, right? And so you'd be like, okay, we've DoorDashed 3 nights in a row, but, we've got a little bit of padding or cushion. Unfortunately, because of previous spending decisions, the district's reserve funds are down right at about that 5% level. And dipping into your savings and going below 5% is really dangerous when you're a large public entity like this because it can impact your credit rating. And that, in turn, makes it more difficult to issue bonds. You may remember that the Portland Public Schools is currently building 3 giant new high schools with $1.8 billion in bond funding. So they really can't risk a further dip in their credit rating.
Yeah. Is it unusual for a district to come up with this level of a budget deficit in the middle of the year? Because I feel used to being like, okay, next year is going to be brutal. Like next year we have a $50 million deficit. I mean, that's scary, but I feel like it was like, okay, yeah, we know this happens. But in the middle of the school year, is it unusual for this sort of thing to pop up?
I do think this is unusual. I haven't covered something quite like this in recent memory. That said, PPS is not alone. We've seen this also at the Reynolds School District. They dealt with it at the beginning of the school year by coordinating 6 furlough days before the end of the year. That's 6 days less of instructional time for students.
Yeah. I mean, and the specter of sort of unexpected furlough days of, well, we're out of money, so we're just going to teach less doesn't sound like a very great precedent to set.
Right.
How is this going to impact PPS? Like, do we know what they're going to do to make up this $10 million? Because it sounds like the piggy bank is, they can't dip in there.
Right. So what is PPS going to do to offset this budget gap? The answer is we don't know for sure yet, but the options on the table look like either a furlough, maybe 2 days is what has been floated, or layoffs. And we don't know yet how many people would be laid off. My gut tells me that it will probably be a furlough day as opposed to layoffs, just because like getting rid of people in April of an ongoing school year is really difficult to do.
It's just
Like
chaos.
it's incredibly disruptive for kids, for staff, for administrators, for everybody.
Yeah.
If I was a betting woman, which I am not, I would guess that we will wind up with fewer days in June. School will get out earlier than planned. Just because like that last week of the school year is, it's not like a ton of new material is getting introduced then anyway. It's mostly like finals, or for if you're a little kid, it's like field day or, like the fun stuff. So that's my best guess, but we don't really know for sure.
Your bet is that they're going to cancel field day?
No, sorry. They would just move field day.
Some kids are going to be so
panic.
upset. Some kids are going to be very happy about that. But
Nobody panic. I'm not saying field day is going to be canceled. I'm saying it would move a couple days earlier and then we would get out of school. So I think the last day of school this year is something like June 8th, June 9th, somewhere in there. And instead it could be like June 5th. I just threw those days out there. I don't have a calendar in front of me. And also, nobody take this as gospel. I don't know for sure yet.
Listeners, this is a podcast. Julia is speculating wildly. These are not facts. If you want facts, read her stories in the Oregonian, which is full of them.
Thank you. Yeah.
I also just keep thinking back to the metaphor that you put forward earlier about the door dashing and about how PPS had unexpected expenses earlier in the year, and that is contributing to this. Is there a way for them to stop door dashing? To extend your metaphor, is that already been discussed of all right, we really need to avoid these sort of unanticipated expenses? Or is that something that a district can't do?
That's a great question. And I think it remains to be answered. I do think they have talked about putting even more stringent and strict financial controls into place. But part of the reason that this is happening is that people always point to enrollment, right? There are far fewer students now at PPS and at almost every other school in the metro area. And that's due to a real cocktail of factors, right? You've got a declining birth rate. People just are not having babies at the rate that they were before. And, I can't imagine why. The world is inexpensive and peaceful. So, let's have all the babies. But there's fewer kindergartners than there used to be, fewer first graders than there used to be. Also, Portland and the Portland metro area in general, pretty high housing cost area, right? People aren't necessarily moving, with young families. It's just there's a lot of barriers. And then there are rising labor costs. And that goes back to the, if you think back to the strike in 2023, and P.S., they're bargaining right now. So we're right back where we were. Yeah. But, the costs of doing business have gone up, right? So your question about cost controls, though, I would say that's where next year comes in, right? That $50 million that you mentioned at the top of the podcast. The Portland Public Schools is looking to cut $50 million from their budget next year. And it's not unique to them. You see it. Beaverton is, I think, at $10 million. Salem Kaiser, I believe the number's 25. And many school districts for next year as they cope with this sort of very potent cocktail of rising costs and declining enrollment.
Yeah. Well, speaking of programs. Speaking of special needs students, there is another piece of gossip I want to get into with you. But first, let's take a quick break.
Spring buying season is here. If your 2026 goal has been to finally buy something for yourself in Portland, you've got to be fully prepared. Local mortgage lender James Adair will set you up with the mortgage plan you need to buy the home you want. James's certified buyer pass can help you write tighter, more competitive offers to beat out cash buyers and negotiate the market with maximum leverage. Real estate is what you own, but your mortgage plan is how you own it. Let James show you how the right plan can create a massive financial lift. Visit pdxhomeloan.com to learn more. James Adair, NMLS 272766 with Better Mortgage Corporation, NMLS 330511, an equal housing lender. Hi, I'm David Plotz. I'm the CEO of CityCast, a podcast network that includes this show you're listening to, and also 12 other CityCasts in 12 other cities. And each one knows their city as well as your local team knows yours. So isn't it time we connected them? Don't you want to know how they're tackling their bike lane problems and housing challenges and sidewalk dog poop crises? That's why I'm hosting a new podcast called Your City Could Be Better. Because it could be. Every week, I'll chat with a different host in our CityCast network about what their cities are doing right and wrong, the weird things they're trying, and the surprising successes, so that we can all learn how to make our cities a little bit better. Listen to Your City Could Be Better on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, Julia, this is like hot gossip as of today that the news is continuing to evolve. So the Metropolitan Learning Center's Alternative High School program. This is a program that serves students with neurodiverse needs. It looked like PPS was going to end this program at this school. There was a lot of sort of uproar about it. But then at the end of last week, we heard they reversed this decision and that apparently is going to stay open. What is going on here? And how does this play into everything that we've been talking about these competing interests?
What a great question. So I want to correct one thing that you said, which is MLC attracts a lot of neurodiverse and genderqueer kids. It isn't, however, a program specifically for those students. Really, it's more a program for kids who are maybe looking for an alternative. It's right there in the name, right? An alternative or a non-traditional option. Kids who feel they, would get lost or not fit in at a large, comprehensive neighborhood high school. Yes, there has been a lot of back and forth about MLC. And when I think about this situation, I think about one of my favorite sayings, which is two things can be true, right? Portland Public Schools, and they have said this, they've admitted it themselves, didn't do a terrific job of communicating that they wanted to close down the high school programs. In fact, they did such a non-terrific job that they allowed 30 rising freshmen, so current eighth graders who will be freshmen in the fall, to enter the lottery for the school, get a slot at the school. They told them they could come. And then 2 weeks later, they were like, oh, sorry, this program's not going to exist any longer.
So this
is not great.
Yeah.
And to her credit, I think Superintendent Kimberly Armstrong led a listening session at the school and apologized. It was like, this was not our finest hour. We messed up. That is true. It can also be true that a high school program with only 41 kids, because that's all that's there right now, those 30 incoming ninth graders haven't started yet. So it can also be true that a high school program with only 41 kids is very expensive to operate because you get no economies of scale and you still need an English teacher. You need an English teacher for those 41 kids, and you need an English teacher that has 160 kids on his or their caseload over at Roosevelt or McDaniel or Lincoln or Grant, right? Mm-hmm. So your per student costs are much, much more at this very small school. And when you have a school district that is looking at massive system-wide cuts, $50 million, massive, about 5% of its budget, you've got to think about what is best for the health of the system as a whole. Mm-hmm. So MLC got a reprieve this year. I don't know that reprieve will last in future years. We'll see. It's a TBD, right? What I can tell you is Portland Public Schools is embarking on a conversation about consolidation and closing schools.
Yeah.
And it's more likely to be concentrated at the elementary school level. Remember what I said about fewer kids coming into elementary school. Portland Public Schools currently operates somewhere between 20 and 25 elementary schools that enroll fewer than 300 kids. At least the last time I looked and did the math, those numbers can shift, right, during the year. So at some point, the number that Superintendent Armstrong has sort of floated, and she did this during that same listening session at PPS, or I'm sorry, at MLC, the district is probably going to wind up needing to close about a dozen schools. Now, whether that will actually happen, I don't know, because it's politically incredibly difficult to close schools.
Exactly.
And that's what you saw at MLC. People lost their minds. Part of the reason they lost their minds was because everything was so abrupt and sudden, and frankly, the rollout was poor. But also, people are emotionally connected to their school, right? Everybody loves their neighborhood school.
And it's worth saying, I mean, I think this might be self-evident, but schools are expensive. The district is having major budgetary issues, but these are the acres of communities, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just sentimentality in a lot of circumstances. It is like
No
people have
question.
built their entire lives around these buildings, which
Absolutely
makes it really,
true.
really deeply disruptive
You are
if they have to close.
invested, right?
Yeah.
I mean, my kids' neighborhood elementary school enrolled 520 kids when they were there. Now they're juniors in high school, and there are, I think, last I checked, about 280.
Mm.
And they're long gone from that school. And still, I am steeped in this stuff. And still, I'm like, well, pick a different school. Don't close our neighborhood
But not my school, of course. Yeah.
Not mine. And that's this is the classic NIMBY. I would like to bring your attention to a story that I wrote last week out of Beaverton, which is about McKay Elementary School, another very small school there, where the teachers and the principal looked at the budget for next year, looked at the fact that they were going to have to create blended classrooms, that they were losing staff, that they were losing what's called specials, art, music, dedicated teachers for those, and went to their community and said, the best thing that we can do for your students, for our students, your children, is to close. And with great grief and regret, the parents accepted that because it came from the teachers and the principal. They accepted that. They wrote to the school board and said, essentially, with great grief and regret, please vote to close our school. So I think there's a lesson there for Portland, and I hope people listen, which is, if you really want to do this, if this has to be done, the best way to do it is to have the building folks lead and have them, because it's kind of like that's who you trust. You trust your children's teachers much more than you trust X person who says, hi, I'm from the school district and I'm here to help, even though that person from the school district might be lovely and have the best of intentions.
Yeah. So, I mean, with everything that we've been talking about, it sounds like it is likely that we're going to see more consolidations and closures at some point within, by next school year, within the next 5 years. Do we have any sort of a sense of when all of this is going to really start to hit?
I would say by fall of 2027, the system will be smaller. I don't know by how many buildings, but I think that there will be proposals on the table before the school board by next fall. And then it's a question of what do they want to vote for? Because remember, some of these are people who want to get elected again. And that's the thing. You can't separate these kinds of decisions from emotion and from politics.
Yeah. Well, Julia, before we wrap up, I wanted to take a look at the statewide picture. We are currently in the short legislative session right now. There are some policies that are being discussed about education, but something that I at least haven't heard a lot about is school funding statewide, and I feel like after the strike that happened in 2023, there was this huge discussion of we really, really, really need to figure out school funding at a statewide level. PPS isn't going to be able to do this on their own. Is there any discussion of that in the legislature right now, or is that just an issue for another day?
So a short legislative session is a difficult time to, get really into the weeds on the school funding formula because it is such a complicated issue with so many stakeholders, all of whom want a seat at the table and all of whom want their voices to be the one that prevails. So it would be highly unlikely to see a major restructuring of school funding during a short session. What we have seen so far this session is a huge push by advocates, parents, teachers, school board members to go down to Salem and say, hey, our costs are rising even faster than the money you've already given us. And keep in mind, schools did get an almost 10% boost this biennium over what's called CSL or current service level. Anyway, there's been a big effort to say, hey, that's great, and we're grateful, and we still need more. Please tap what's called the Education Stability Fund, which is like an emergency reserve fund. It's fed by the lottery. It's only supposed to be spent down in case of, break the bank, absolute emergency. I've door dashed every single day for 6 months, et
It
cetera.
sounds very much
That's
like a break glass in case of emergency sort of situation. Yeah.
And then there's also some pretty wonky stuff about like decoupling from the federal tax code. So I think that Governor Kotek made it fairly clear in a press conference at the end of last week that there will not be more money for schools this session. That doesn't mean that schools advocates have given up, but I would say it's fairly unlikely that we will see like some big source of new money for schools by the time the session closes in March.
Yeah. So that does, leave the possibility of the next time that the legislature comes around that this could be taken up. But like with the timeline that you sort of put out of when some of these major cuts might happen, it sounds like PPS is going to need to be making some decisions before this comes up for debate in a real way.
Yes, that's right, because school districts have to have a balanced budget, specifically to avoid this kind of mid-year situation. They have to come up with their budget for the following school year by June 30th. So Portland and every other school district around the state needs to meet that requirement.
Well, Julia, thank you for filling us in and for giving us the update of how PPS is managing to limp through the end of this educational cycle.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say, because I would be remiss if not, all of this is very stressful and upsetting. And also there are beautiful things happening in schools every day. There are teachers going above and beyond. There are amazing kids out there doing incredible work. There's principals making it happen with less. So don't give up on public schools. Anybody who's listening, be a part of the system. Work for change from within.
Yeah. And from what I see in my day-to-day life, like, students in Portland are amazing. Like, we have the coolest, most interesting, most intelligent, rad kids of all time. So even if there's challenges, I think it's working for a lot of people.
What a great ending. Thanks, John.
Well, that's all for us today here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you left us a rating or told a friend about it. And don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Portland neighbor. Just visit membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.